What if I told you that the Bible we all know might actually be missing some crucial details about the creation of the world, the lives of the patriarchs, and even the laws of God Himself? The Book of Jubilees, preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, claims to fill in these gaps, revealing hidden stories and offering a deeper insight into God's divine plan. But here's the thing. This book was banned from most of the Christian world. So, why was it excluded? In today's video, we'll be uncovering the mysterious Book of Jubilees, also known as Little Genesis, and exploring why its 50 chapters were left out of the mainstream Christian Bible. This ancient text holds lost details about the Genesis narrative, giving us a cosmic perspective on how angels, heavenly time, and hidden commandments were passed down to humanity. But the Book of Jubilees didn't stop there. It even claims that the calendar most of the world follows today is wrong. Time itself, according to Jubilees, was given a sacred structure by God, a structure that few follow today. But why was this ancient text rejected by the early church? What secrets does it contain that were deemed too controversial for mainstream Christianity? Let's dive into this fascinating book and discover what might have been intentionally left out of the Bible. The Book of Jubilees begins with a retelling of the creation story, which is familiar to us from the Book of Genesis, but it goes far beyond what we find in most Bibles. According to Jubilees, when God created the world, He didn't just bring life into being, He also set up the very structure of time itself, aligning it with His divine order. This is where the concept of sacred time comes into play. Unlike the traditional calendar most of us follow, the Book of Jubilees introduces a precise solar calendar, which is overseen by heavenly angels. This calendar governs the cosmic cycles of the universe, not just marking the passage of days, but aligning everything with God's will. Jubilees claims that humanity was meant to follow this divine calendar, which consists of 364 days divided into 4 seasons of exactly 91 days each. This structure ensures that sacred days like the Sabbath and festivals always fall on the correct dates. It's a perfect system, one that has been largely forgotten by the rest of the world. The creation story in Genesis begins with the creation of the earth, but Jubilees gives us an even bigger picture. Before the world was even formed, angels were created on the very first day of creation. These angels play a crucial role in the governance of the universe, including the regulation of time and seasons. The Book of Jubilees reveals that these angels were assigned specific duties by God, with some overseeing natural phenomena, like the movements of the heavens, and others serving as messengers and guardians of God's laws. This idea of angels controlling the heavens is found in other ancient texts, but the Book of Jubilees emphasizes how these angelic beings help maintain order in the universe, ensuring that the sun, moon, and stars follow their divine paths. As it states in Jubilees 29, God ordained that the sun should keep its course according to the divisions of the seasons. These angels don't just watch over humanity, they control the very fabric of time itself. When humans fall out of alignment with God's time, it leads to chaos, a theme that plays a central role throughout the Book of Jubilees. One of the most controversial aspects of the Book of Jubilees is its insistence that the world should follow a solar calendar, not the lunar calendar that many ancient cultures, including the Israelites, eventually adopted. According to Jubilees, the solar calendar is the only correct way to measure time, because it aligns perfectly with God's divine order. The book explains that the solar year consists of 364 days, divided into 52 perfect weeks. Each season spring, summer, fall, and winter, contains exactly 13 weeks or 91 days. This system ensures that the Sabbath and other sacred festivals are always observed on the correct days each year. Interestingly, this solar calendar system is strikingly similar to the Ethiopian calendar, which is still in use today by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Ethiopian year is divided into 13 months, 12 months of 30 days, with an additional month called Pagum, consisting of 5 or 6 days to make up the difference. Could it be that the Ethiopian calendar is one of the few modern systems that still reflects the sacred time described in Jubilees? In contrast, the lunar calendar, adopted by many cultures in the ancient world, including the Israelites, is seen as a corruption of this divine order. The lunar calendar is irregular, causing the months and festivals to shift over time. And according to the Book of Jubilees, this deviation from the solar calendar leads to spiritual disorder. There are those who would surely continue to observe the moon, but the Book of Jubilees warns that following the lunar calendar brings humanity further away from God's divine plan. By failing to align ourselves with the solar calendar that God ordained, we are essentially losing track of sacred time. The question now is, why did the early church reject the Book of Jubilees with all its revelations about sacred time, divine order, and the role of angels in maintaining the universe's balance? What was so controversial about this ancient text that it couldn't be included in the canon of Scripture? As we reflect on the mystery of the Book of Jubilees, one thing is clear. It offers a fascinating alternative view of our relationship with time and the cosmos. In a world where time seems to slip through our fingers, perhaps this ancient text is calling us back to a deeper understanding of God's perfect order, a reminder that sacred time, like everything else in creation, is meant to be lived in alignment with His will. What do you think? Could the Book of Jubilees hold the keys to understanding our true place in God's divine plan? Should we reconsider its exclusion from the Bible? Let's keep this conversation going. If you found this video enlightening, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of the Bible. Together, let's explore the hidden truths that have been left out of mainstream Christian thought and uncover the secrets that may change the way we see our world and our Creator. The Book of Jubilees reveals profound insights about time, creation, and God's divine plan. It suggests that disturbing the established seasons and misaligning with the divine calendar is not merely an error, it is an act of disobedience to God's will. The text specifically mentions how, by following the lunar calendar, humanity disrupts the sacred rhythm God set into motion from the very beginning of creation. But what if the answer lies in the solar calendar? According to Jubilees, returning to the solar calendar could help realign humanity with the divine order and cosmic harmony originally established by God at the beginning of time. It is more than just a matter of practical timekeeping. It is a call to return to God's original design for the universe and the flow of time. The Book of Jubilees affirms the traditional Genesis narrative of a 6-day creation, but it goes further, delving into a more detailed understanding of the Sabbath. According to Jubilees, God did not simply rest on the 7th day. He sanctified it, making it a divine institution, an eternal law given to both humans and angels. The Sabbath is described in Jubilees as not just a day of rest, but as the foundation of time itself. It was set apart from the very beginning of creation, intended to be observed forever. This concept of the Sabbath as a cosmic principle is of immense importance in Jubilees. Not only does it regulate the weekly cycle, but it is also intricately tied to larger cycles of time, such as the Jubilee cycle, which spans 49 years. These cycles, known as the Jubilee cycles, are designed to restore harmony to the world by bringing periods of rest, release, and renewal. Rest for the land, for the people, and even for the angelic realm. As it is written in Jubilees 21, God sanctified the seventh day and blessed it, making it a perpetual sign of holiness for all his works. In this context, the Book of Jubilees is not merely recounting the Genesis creation story. It is shedding light on the hidden significance behind the cycles of time that govern all of creation. The text reveals how the Sabbath is more than just a day of physical rest. It is a divine principle that orders the very fabric of time, impacting everything from the movement of the stars to the lives of angels and humans. Jubilees also shares that Adam was created on the sixth day, as described in Genesis, but it adds a significant layer to his story. According to Jubilees, after creating Adam, God gave him specific commandments, laws that included the observance of the Sabbath, purity laws, and guidelines for marriage and worship. These laws were delivered through angels and were meant to be followed not only by Adam, but by all his descendants, as part of the covenant God made with humanity. While Genesis highlights God's direct interactions with Adam, Jubilees introduces angels as mediators, who play a crucial role in teaching Adam how to observe God's commandments. These angels, especially those known as the angels of the presence, ensure that Adam and Eve understand the laws of holiness, sacrifice, and moral conduct. On the sixth day of the second week, according to Jubilees 31:2, God brought all the animals to Adam, dividing them into categories. First, the beasts of the earth, then the cattle, followed by the birds of the air. All creatures, both on land and in water, were brought before Adam, according to their kinds. This interaction with the angels reinforced the idea that God's laws are not merely human creations, but part of a heavenly order, a divine blueprint that the angels themselves adhere to in the heavenly realm. This divine interaction emphasizes that God's law is eternal, binding both humanity and the celestial beings to a higher moral order. Could it be that the laws passed down to Adam by the angels were given long before Moses received the Ten Commandments? How might these ancient commandments shed light on the laws that governed humanity from the very beginning? If you're intrigued by the ancient laws God gave to Adam and how they compare to the laws given through Moses, feel free to let us know in the comments. Should we take a deeper dive into these early commandments and explore their significance in greater detail? The Book of Jubilees also provides additional insights into the story of Cain and Abel, expanding on what Genesis tells us. While Genesis briefly mentions Cain's murder of Abel, Jubilees adds depth to the story, showing the spiritual consequences of Cain's sin. The murder of Abel is seen as the first major breach of God's law, an act that carries significant ramifications for all of humanity. This sin marks the beginning of a chain of events that will affect future generations, with spiritual consequences echoing through time. While Cain is cast out, Jubilees emphasizes that the righteous line of humanity continues through Seth, Adam's third son. In Jubilees, Seth is portrayed as a figure of righteousness, one who is taught to observe the divine laws handed down by the angels. This sets the stage for the eventual unfolding of human history, where the righteous line, descended from Seth, will play a pivotal role in the fulfillment of God's promises to his people. The story of Noah and the flood is one of the most well-known tales in the Bible, particularly from the book of Genesis. However, the Book of Jubilees offers additional insights and revelations about what happened both before and after the flood. While Genesis focuses on Noah's survival, the Book of Jubilees shifts the emphasis toward the covenant that God establishes with Noah after the flood, a covenant that stresses the importance of purity, righteousness, and adherence to God's laws. Before the flood, the Book of Jubilees goes into much greater detail regarding the corruption of the earth, especially focusing on the Nephilim, the offspring of fallen angels and human women. While Genesis 6:1-4 briefly mentions the Nephilim, Jubilees provides a much more in-depth context, showing how these giants played a significant role in spreading wickedness throughout the world. According to Jubilees, lawlessness grew rampant on the earth, and all living creatures, humans, cattle, beasts, birds, and everything that walked on the earth, began to corrupt their ways. They turned on one another, devouring each other, leading to a world consumed by moral decay and violence. This moral corruption wasn't solely the result of human sin. The Book of Jubilees reveals that fallen angels had imparted forbidden knowledge to humanity, further distorting the natural order of creation. In response to this overwhelming wickedness, God swiftly decided to cleanse the earth with a great flood. However, Noah and his family were spared, for they had maintained their righteousness and purity in the midst of a deeply corrupt world. After the flood, the Book of Jubilees tells us that God did not merely promise to never again destroy the earth with a flood. He also established a new covenant with Noah, one that included specific laws about purity and sacrifice. These laws, which would later be passed down to the Israelites, were designed to help humanity maintain holiness and avoid falling into the same corruption that led to the flood. A key element of this new covenant was Noah's instruction to observe the Sabbath, as well as the same laws regarding sacrifice and purity that had been given to Adam. This covenant marked a new beginning for humanity, one that emphasized the necessity of remaining obedient to God's laws in order to avoid further judgment. The laws of sacrifice, which would later be formalized in the Mosaic Law, were already being practiced by Noah as part of this new covenant. These laws included detailed instructions on how to offer burnt offerings to God, as well as guidelines on how to remain pure in both body and spirit. The covenant Noah entered into after the flood was not only about survival, but also about the responsibility to maintain righteousness and uphold God's laws in order to prevent the earth from falling back into corruption. In Genesis 12, we are introduced to Abraham, the man whom God called to leave his homeland and journey to Canaan. However, the Book of Jubilees takes us even further back into Abraham's youth, providing additional insights into his early life that are not found in Genesis. According to Jubilees, Abraham grew up in a family deeply entrenched in idolatry. His father, Terah, worshipped false gods, a detail that is not mentioned in Genesis, but plays a significant role in the narrative of Abraham's life in Jubilees. Jubilees presents a vivid picture of a young Abraham who boldly rejected the pagan practices around him. He chose to follow the one true God, even in the face of great opposition. In one key scene, Abraham challenges his father, asking, "What is this idol you worship?" When he realizes that the idol is merely an image made of stone, he destroys it in front of his father's house, setting the idols on fire. He then flees into the wilderness, refusing to be part of the idolatrous culture. This act of spiritual rebellion is described in Jubilees 11:16-17, marking a dramatic turning point in Abraham's life. While Genesis focuses on Abraham's obedience to God's call to leave his homeland, the Book of Jubilees portrays Abraham as a revolutionary figure who not only obeys God's call, but also takes a stand, against the idolatry of his time. This bold act of defiance against the pagan practices of his family and society sets the stage for Abraham's later role as the father of the chosen people. It underscores his commitment to rejecting false gods and following the one true God, a commitment that would pass down through his descendants. One of the most striking differences between Genesis and the Book of Jubilees is the portrayal of Abraham as someone who follows divine laws long before Moses was born. In Genesis, there is no mention of any laws being given to Abraham other than the covenant of circumcision. However, the Book of Jubilees emphasizes that Abraham followed God's laws in their entirety, even before the formal giving of the Mosaic Law. This presents Abraham not just as a man of faith, but also as one who lived by the divine principles that would later become the foundation of the Israelite faith. In summary, the Book of Jubilees provides a deeper, more expansive understanding of key biblical events, including Noah's covenant with God and Abraham's early life. These additional details help to illustrate the ongoing struggle between purity and corruption, obedience and rebellion, and the constant need for humanity to remain faithful to God's laws in order to avoid the consequences of sin. Through these stories, we see that God's covenant is not just about survival, but about establishing a way of life, one that prioritizes righteousness, holiness, and a rejection of the corruption that has plagued the earth from the beginning. In Genesis 17, we read about God's covenant with Abraham, specifically regarding circumcision, a sign of the eternal promise between them. However, in the Book of Jubilees, a more elaborate narrative unfolds. Abraham is depicted as someone who already follows the Sabbath, makes sacrifices, and adheres to laws typically associated with Moses. According to Jubilees, these laws were not newly introduced during Moses' time. Instead, they were passed down from the angels to the patriarchs, starting with Adam. Abraham, therefore, receives these commandments from the angels and is expected to follow them as part of his covenant relationship with God. Abraham's faith journey in Genesis is framed as his personal devotion to God. But in Jubilees, he is portrayed as a central figure in a grand cosmic plan. His actions are not just a matter of personal faith, they are part of a divine order that governs both heaven and earth. Abraham is guided by angels, and the laws he follows, such as the Sabbath and various purity laws, are already in place, predating Moses. These laws were seen as part of a divine structure that influences both the spiritual and physical realms, creating a framework for the harmony of creation itself. The concept of circumcision takes on an even more profound meaning in Jubilees than it does in Genesis. In Genesis 17, God commands Abraham to circumcise himself and all the males in his household as a sign of their covenant. But Jubilees reveals that this act is not merely symbolic. Circumcision, according to the Book of Jubilees, is a cosmic law that has existed since the creation of the world. This covenant is inscribed on the heavenly tablets, which are viewed as God's blueprint for creation. These tablets contain the laws that govern both angels and humans, and they make clear that circumcision is an eternal ordinance for all generations. It is not simply a ritual, it is a divine law, ordained and written on the heavenly tablets, and it is a law that will stand forever. The Book of Jubilees goes into great detail about how circumcision is part of a much larger divine order. It isn't merely a physical mark on the body. It symbolizes alignment with the cosmic laws of the universe. The covenant established with Abraham is not just a personal agreement between him and God, but it is part of a divine structure that transcends time and space. The focus in Genesis is on Abraham's obedience to God's command, while Jubilees emphasizes that this obedience is a key part of a cosmic and eternal law. It is a connection between Abraham, his descendants, and the broader divine framework that governs all creation. Another powerful story that appears in both Genesis and Jubilees is the binding of Isaac, or the Akedah. In Genesis 22, God tests Abraham's faith by commanding him to sacrifice his son Isaac. The story in Jubilees follows a similar narrative, but with additional layers of meaning. In Jubilees, the test is not just a trial between Abraham and God. It becomes part of a larger cosmic battle. The angel Mastema, who is often associated with Satan, suggests the test to God, hoping that Abraham will fail. Mastema represents the forces of evil, always seeking to lead the righteous astray. However, in Jubilees, the narrative unfolds differently than in Genesis. As Abraham prepares to sacrifice Isaac, the angels intervene. God allows this test to occur as a way to prove that Abraham's faith is stronger than the temptations of evil. In Jubilees 18:10, it is written, "And I stood before him, and before the prince of Mastema, and the Lord said, Command him not to lay his hand on the lad, nor to do anything to him, for I have shown that he fears the Lord." The story in Jubilees introduces a much deeper level of spiritual significance. The test of Abraham's faith is not just about Abraham's obedience, but it is part of the greater spiritual warfare between good and evil. The forces of evil, embodied by Mastema, hope to lead Abraham into failure. But God's intervention shows that true faithfulness will always triumph over evil. In Genesis, the focus is solely on Abraham's personal trial of faith, but in Jubilees, this act is part of a larger cosmic narrative. It is a symbolic moment in the spiritual battle that takes place between the forces of light and darkness. The test of Abraham's faith becomes a declaration that God's righteousness and justice will ultimately prevail, regardless of the forces that try to oppose it. In Genesis 25:23, we read about the prophecy given to Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau, that the older son would serve the younger. This is significant because it sets the stage for the rivalry between the two brothers, which would go on to shape the history of Israel. But in the Book of Jubilees, this prophecy is given a much broader and deeper meaning. It is not just a family feud between two brothers. It is part of a larger divine plan. According to Jubilees, Jacob was always meant to inherit the blessing. He was chosen from birth to carry on the legacy of righteousness that began with Abraham. Jubilees emphasizes that the rivalry between Jacob and Esau was not accidental. It was part of a divine blueprint that God had ordained from the beginning. Jacob's destiny was to continue the righteous line that God had established with Abraham and Isaac. The Book of Jubilees introduces the concept of predestination, showing that God's plan for the world is not random or chaotic, but is part of a carefully crafted and eternal design. In this way, Jubilees not only expands on the stories found in Genesis, but also reveals a deeper understanding of God's cosmic plan. The lives of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the other patriarchs are not just individual journeys of faith. They are part of a larger spiritual drama in which the forces of good and evil are constantly at war. Each act of obedience, each moment of faith, contributes to the unfolding of God's divine will. The stories in Jubilees challenge us to see beyond the surface and understand that our lives, too, are part of a much larger story, a cosmic narrative written on the heavenly tablets. The message is clear. Obedience to God's commands is not just about following a set of rules. It is about aligning oneself with the divine order that governs all creation. Just as Abraham's obedience to circumcision and his faith in the binding of Isaac were part of a larger cosmic plan, so too are our actions part of a greater divine purpose. The stories of the patriarchs are not merely historical accounts. They are spiritual lessons that point us toward the eternal truths that govern both heaven and earth. The covenant with God set the stage for Esau's destiny to deviate from God's divine plan. In fact, the Book of Jubilees highlights that Isaac and Rebekah were given special insight from God regarding Esau's rebellious nature, as well as his future descendants' opposition to Israel. In Jubilees 19:13, God speaks directly to Rebekah, saying, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." This reference mirrors Genesis 25:23, which also tells of this separation and prophecy. Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. In the book of Genesis, we witness the dramatic unfolding of this prophecy, with Jacob's cleverness and Esau's impulsiveness shaping their paths. However, the Jubilees account clarifies that Jacob was always destined to inherit the birthright, and though his actions may appear deceptive, they were actually part of a much larger divine plan. Jubilees presents a key distinction. Esau is not simply portrayed as the brother who loses his birthright. He represents a line of rebellion, a nation that would rise in opposition to God's chosen people. His descendants would embody this defiance against Israel, fulfilling the prophecy that the older will serve the younger. While Genesis speaks about the immediate tension between Esau and Jacob, particularly after the birthright and blessing events, Genesis 27:41, Jubilees expands this narrative. It shows how Esau's descendants would form a nation that directly opposes Jacob's lineage, the Israelites. This ongoing struggle between Esau and Jacob is part of a much larger cosmic conflict between righteousness and rebellion, a theme often emphasized in the Jubilees text. Jacob represents righteousness, while Esau is portrayed as the embodiment of rebellion. Esau's descent into rebellion is further illustrated in Jubilees 37:1, which tells of Esau's departure to the hill country of Seir. It says, "Esau took his wives, his sons, and all that he had, and went up to the hill country of Seir, and lived there." Esau thus became a nation unto himself, Edom. His descendants would go on to oppress Jacob's descendants in a series of conflicts, as recorded in Jubilees and Genesis 36:8-9. Esau's rebellion was not merely a personal matter, it became a national issue. His descendants, the Edomites, would have a long-standing history of conflict with Israel, symbolizing the spiritual battle that began with Esau's own defiance. One of the most pivotal moments in Jacob's life is when he receives his father Isaac's blessing in Genesis 27. This blessing ensures that Jacob will become the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. However, Jubilees goes beyond this, portraying Jacob not just as the recipient of a birthright, but as the one who inherits the full continuation of divine laws passed down from Abraham. According to Jubilees, after Jacob receives the blessing, God and the angels reveal to him the laws that he and his descendants must follow, laws concerning the Sabbath, purity, and the sacred calendar. These laws, which would later become formalized in the Mosaic Law, were given to Jacob as a way to establish his role as the keeper of God's commandments. In Jubilees 27:23, God appears to Jacob at night and speaks to him. "I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac." The land whereon you are lying, I will give to you and your descendants shall be as the stars of heaven. This vision, found in Genesis 28:12-15, is a pivotal moment in Jacob's journey. In Jubilees, the laws that Jacob receives are portrayed as part of a larger cosmic order, a divine structure that governs both heaven and earth. The emphasis on Jacob as the inheritor of divine law elevates his role beyond just that of a son receiving his birthright. Jacob is presented as the custodian of God's eternal commandments, a bridge between heaven and earth, tasked with preserving the sacred laws for his descendants. Thus, Jacob's role in Jubilees is far more significant than in the book of Genesis. While Genesis focuses on his personal relationship with God, Jubilees stresses his responsibility as the keeper of the divine order, linking him to the heavenly tablets and making him the foundational figure for the Israelite people. His descendants, therefore, inherit not just a land or a blessing, but the very laws that would shape the future of Israel, as well as their covenant relationship with God. As mentioned earlier, the Book of Jubilees doesn't merely focus on the rivalry between Jacob and Esau. It takes this conflict a step further, expanding it into a prophetic vision of the ongoing struggle between their descendants. In Jubilees, the narrative suggests that the nations arising from Esau will continuously oppose Jacob's descendants, the Israelites, throughout history. This isn't just about the personal feud between two brothers. It goes much deeper, tying into the idea of a spiritual battle. On one side, righteousness represented by Jacob and Israel. On the other, rebellion, embodied by Esau and his descendants, the Edomites. In Jubilees 24:51, this prophetic struggle is not simply about territorial conflict. Rather, it is part of a larger cosmic war between the forces of good and evil. Esau's lineage represents nations that will rise up to become enemies of God's chosen people, Israel. This ongoing tension between the two peoples plays a significant role throughout biblical history. The spiritual opposition between Israel and Esau's descendants is not confined to the past, but is deeply embedded in the apocalyptic vision of Jubilees, which links this struggle to the end times. The story continues, explaining that Jacob and his sons went down into Egypt to join Joseph, while Esau's sons remained in the land of Edom. From that moment on, the enmity between these nations persisted. This narrative can be found in Jubilees 45:3-5, which draws from the Genesis account, specifically Genesis 33:16. This division between the descendants of Jacob and Esau demonstrates a spiritual battle that transcends personal conflict. It reflects a broader cosmic plan, a struggle between light and darkness that spans the entirety of human history. The vision of this enduring spiritual struggle reflects the broader themes of Jubilees. The story of the patriarchs, while grounded in the lives of individuals like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their families, is ultimately a small part of a larger cosmic plan. This plan involves not just the family of Abraham, but also the destinies of nations. More importantly, it reveals the ultimate battle between good and evil. Jubilees' prophetic nature connects these personal stories to a larger narrative, one that encompasses the fate of nations and the eventual triumph of righteousness over rebellion. In Genesis, we learn about the birth of Jacob's 12 sons through his wives, Leah and Rachel, as well as their maidservants. These 12 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin, become the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. However, Jubilees provides a deeper insight into the divine order behind these births. It emphasizes that the birth of these sons was not merely a result of human relationships, but part of a greater, predetermined plan set by God. According to Jubilees, the timing and sequence of the births of Jacob's sons were specifically ordained by God to align with the sacred calendar. Each son's birth was carefully scheduled to fulfill God's larger cosmic plan. The book stresses that each son was born according to a divine schedule, making their arrival a part of God's greater purpose for the world. As Jubilees 28:12 states, Jacob's wives and maidservants gave birth to his 12 sons, each according to the time set by the Lord, and their destinies were written on the heavenly tablets. This idea reinforces the belief that the 12 tribes of Israel were not an accident of human history, but a carefully orchestrated plan unfolding in line with the divine will. In contrast, while Genesis focuses on the narrative of Jacob's sons and the circumstances surrounding their births, Jubilees emphasizes that their births were foreordained and inscribed in the heavenly tablets long before they took place. This perspective brings a sense of divine purpose to the family dynamics and emphasizes the idea that their lives were part of a cosmic story far greater than their personal experiences. One of the most significant moments in Genesis is the story of Reuben, Jacob's eldest son, who loses his birthright after committing a grave sin. Genesis 35:22. Jubilees expands on this event, giving it deeper spiritual meaning and showing the far-reaching consequences of Reuben's actions. In Jubilees, Reuben's sin is not just seen as a personal failing. It is viewed as a violation of divine laws established long before his birth. This act disqualifies Reuben from leading the tribes, which in turn allows Judah, the fourth son, to rise to prominence. Levi, the third son, is also elevated, taking on the sacred role of priesthood. Jubilees frames Reuben's sin as a spiritual transgression that directly affects the future of the tribes of Israel. His actions disqualify him from receiving the birthright and inheritance. Instead, Judah is chosen to be the prince over his brothers, and Levi is set apart for the priesthood forever. As Jubilees 33:10 states, because of his sin, Reuben was not reckoned in the inheritance, but Judah was chosen as the prince over his brothers, and Levi for the priesthood forever. This shift in leadership highlights the divine order governing the tribes of Israel and shows how individual actions align with or oppose the larger cosmic plan. While Genesis briefly mentions Reuben's disqualification, Jubilees emphasizes the spiritual implications of this event and how it fits into the divine framework. Judah's rise to leadership and Levi's appointment as priest are not mere happenstances. They are part of God's eternal law, demonstrating that the unfolding of history is not random, but divinely orchestrated. However, in Jubilees, the role of Levi as the priestly tribe is presented as part of an eternal mandate. The book stresses that Levi's priesthood was not simply a matter of tribal duty or human initiative. It was established long before the formalization of the Levitical priesthood under Moses. According to Jubilees, Levi was chosen by God to be the spiritual leader of Israel, responsible for ensuring that God's laws were upheld and followed by the people. His priestly role is framed as part of the cosmic order, reflecting the larger spiritual framework that governs Israel's future. In this divine order, Levi's role is more than just a religious function. It is a divine mandate, established on the heavenly tablets long before the laws of Moses were written. Levi's descendants were not simply appointed priests. They were chosen to uphold God's sacred laws, maintaining the covenant between God and his people. This understanding of Levi's role emphasizes the continuity of God's plan throughout history, where every action and decision is part of a much larger, divinely guided purpose. The connection between heaven and earth is profoundly illustrated in the story of Levi. Levi was set apart for the priesthood forever, destined to offer sacrifices and mediate between the people and the Lord. This role was not simply a response to historical events. It was an integral part of God's divine plan, as recorded on the heavenly tablets. The concept is established in Jubilees 32:17 and is also referenced in Genesis and Exodus. The descendants of Levi were specifically chosen and set apart as priests, not just during Moses' time, but as part of a cosmic order established long before the events at Mount Sinai. While Genesis and Exodus focus on the Levitical priesthood during the period of Moses, the Book of Jubilees goes further. It emphasizes that Levi's priesthood was always part of God's eternal plan. It wasn't merely a reactive measure to the circumstances of that time. It was an essential element of the spiritual structure of the universe, predating even the establishment of Israel as a nation. Levi's priesthood was never accidental. It was a part of the grand cosmic order, a central piece in God's divine will for humanity. In the biblical narrative of Genesis, the 12 sons of Jacob go on to become the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. We see their journeys unfold as they eventually settle in the Promised Land. However, in Jubilees, the tribes are depicted as more than just landholders. They are portrayed as the guardians of God's law, entrusted with upholding the divine commandments passed down from Abraham and Isaac. Each tribe has a specific spiritual responsibility and is expected to follow the laws written on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees further emphasizes that the 12 tribes were not simply chosen to inherit land, but to serve as stewards of God's commandments. They are meant to ensure that God's laws are upheld by all generations. As written in Jubilees 29:6, "And the Lord said unto Jacob, These are the laws for your sons and their descendants forever, written on the heavenly tablets, that they may walk in them and live." The tribes are called not just to possess the land, but to safeguard God's commandments for all time, preserving the divine order and ensuring its observance across generations. In Genesis, we see Jacob bless his sons and establish the 12 tribes. However, Jubilees expands upon this, showing that the tribes were also given the crucial task of passing down the divine laws. These blessings were not just promises of land or prosperity. They carried with them a sacred responsibility. Each tribe's role was cosmic in nature, connecting their actions to the spiritual destiny of Israel. These roles were not born out of human effort or circumstance, but were part of God's eternal design. The betrayal of Joseph by his brothers is one of the most dramatic and pivotal moments in Genesis. In Genesis 37, Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery, driven by jealousy and resentment over their father Jacob's favoritism. However, Jubilees presents this event in a much broader context. What was a family dispute in Genesis is framed in Jubilees as a transgression against the divine order itself. According to Jubilees, the brothers' betrayal was not simply a personal failure, but a serious sin against God's law, recorded on the heavenly tablets. In Jubilees 34:4-9, it is stated that the brothers' sin disrupted the cosmic order, and they would face divine punishment for their actions unless they repented. This differs from Genesis, where the focus is more on personal guilt and the emotional turmoil of the brothers. In Jubilees, the sin is seen as something far more significant, a transgression against the eternal laws of the universe, with consequences not just for the brothers, but for their descendants. Their betrayal would bring suffering to Israel, as the nation would later be enslaved in Egypt. a consequence of their actions that was written on the heavenly tablets. Joseph's rise to power in Egypt, as described in Genesis 41, is portrayed as the result of his wisdom and ability to interpret dreams. But in Jubilees, this is expanded further. Joseph's success in Egypt wasn't simply due to his own skills or luck. It was part of a divine plan, predestined in the heavenly tablets. Joseph's rise was not random. It was God's will that he would become the savior of Israel during the time of famine. Jubilees makes it clear that Joseph's role was always part of the heavenly design, intended to create the circumstances that would lead to the eventual Exodus. His life is shown as a series of divine interventions, each one aligning with God's greater purpose. His rise to power, his ability to interpret dreams, and even the circumstances that brought him to Egypt were all written in the heavenly tablets. This was not a matter of coincidence. It was God's eternal plan, unfolding in history. In Jubilees 42:2, it is written, "And it was written on the heavenly tablets that Joseph would rule over Egypt, and through him the sons of Israel would be saved from famine, but they would also be bound in Egypt for a time." This passage shows that Joseph's role was part of a larger narrative. His success in Egypt wasn't just about providing for his family during a famine. It was part of a broader, cosmic event. His story, as told in Jubilees, is not just about his individual rise to power, but about God's grand design for the nation of Israel. One of the most fascinating additions in Jubilees is the involvement of angels in Joseph's life. While Genesis portrays Joseph as having a special relationship with God, primarily through his dreams, Jubilees expands on this by introducing the role of angels. These angels were sent by God to protect Joseph and guide him throughout his journey, ensuring that he would fulfill his destiny in Egypt. According to Jubilees, angels intervened at key moments in Joseph's life, protecting him from harm and helping him remain faithful to God's plan. The angel's role was not just to protect Joseph physically, but to ensure that he would continue on the path that God had laid out for him. From the moment Joseph was sold into slavery, angels watched over him, guiding him through every trial and tribulation, ensuring that he remained a faithful servant of God. The involvement of angels in Joseph's story underscores the cosmic significance of his life. It wasn't just a personal journey, it was a part of God's grand plan for Israel. The angels' protection and guidance serve as a reminder that nothing in Joseph's life happened by chance. Every step, every trial, every success was part of God's design for the salvation of Israel. In the Book of Jubilees, it is revealed that Joseph's life was precious in the eyes of the Lord, and his path had already been written in the heavenly tablets. This detail, emphasizing the involvement of angels, adds a profound spiritual dimension to Joseph's story that is absent in the book of Genesis. In Jubilees, we see that Joseph's journey wasn't merely a series of fortunate events. His rise to power and the events that followed were carefully orchestrated by God. It was not only Joseph's own fate that was being shaped, but the entire future of his family and people. Angels were tasked with ensuring that Joseph's journey would unfold in a way that would ultimately lead to his family being saved from famine, and eventually to the deliverance of Israel. This is an important distinction between Genesis and Jubilees. In Genesis, Joseph's role ends with his family's settlement in Egypt. However, in Jubilees, Joseph's life takes on a much broader prophetic significance. His experiences and actions are portrayed as foreshadowing the eventual enslavement and liberation of the Israelites. According to Jubilees, Joseph's rise to power in Egypt was not just about saving his family from famine. but also about fulfilling a divine prophecy that would set the stage for the Exodus. In Jubilees, it is revealed that Joseph was not only aware of his family's future struggles, but he also knew that they would eventually face bondage in Egypt. He understood that his role was not just to save them temporarily, but to prepare them for the eventual deliverance that would come through God's mighty hand. In one of the most powerful passages of Jubilees, Joseph speaks to his brothers, saying, "I will die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Fear not, for these things have been written and sealed on the heavenly tablets." Jubilees 46:9. This statement underscores the prophetic aspect of Joseph's life. His death, as seen in Jubilees, isn't simply the end of his personal story. It marks the beginning of the Israelites' enslavement in Egypt, but also serves as a reminder of the promise of their future redemption. This prophetic vision stands in contrast to the account in Genesis, where Joseph's death is depicted merely as the conclusion of his journey. In Jubilees, however, Joseph's passing signifies the continuation of God's larger plan for his people. His death is a pivot, a transition into a new phase where Israel, though enslaved, is still part of God's ultimate plan of redemption. This cosmic scope connects Joseph's individual story to the greater narrative of salvation that will unfold through the Exodus. The account in Jubilees also offers a unique perspective on Israel's eventual enslavement. In Genesis, Israel's suffering begins when a new Pharaoh arises who does not know Joseph, and he begins to oppress the Israelites. Exodus 1:8 through 14. But in Jubilees, this period of oppression is framed as part of a divine and cosmic plan that had been foretold long before the events took place. According to Jubilees, God had already prophesied the Israelites' bondage and suffering as part of his greater purpose. This foreknowledge wasn't just a passive observation, but part of a meticulously laid-out strategy that would ultimately lead Israel to freedom through the Exodus and the giving of the Mosaic Law. Jubilees ties Joseph's role in bringing Israel to Egypt into this prophetic narrative. While Joseph's intervention had saved Israel from famine, his actions were always meant to set in motion a larger spiritual narrative. Their stay in Egypt, as seen in Jubilees, was never meant to be permanent. Israel's time in Egypt was predestined to end in enslavement. But even in this dark chapter of their history, God's plan for their deliverance would be fully realized, and his power would be displayed to the world. Jubilees states that it was already written in the heavenly tablets that Israel would be oppressed in Egypt, but that God would bring them out with great power and wonders, so that his name would be glorified. Jubilees 48:1. This places Israel's time in Egypt within a larger spiritual framework. Their suffering is not just historical, it's a crucial part of God's plan to prepare them for his divine law and to showcase his glory through their eventual deliverance. Furthermore, Jubilees introduces a layer of spiritual warfare that isn't present in the account of Exodus. The oppression of Israel is portrayed not just as a matter of political power, but as part of a cosmic battle between the forces of good and evil. In Jubilees, Masta, a figure often associated with Satan, is described as actively working to harden Pharaoh's heart, increasing the suffering of the Israelites. Masta and his evil spirits are said to have encouraged the Egyptians to oppress Israel even more harshly, testing the Israelites' faith and devotion to God. In one passage, it is written, "The prince of Masta stood against them, seeking to destroy them with hard bondage and to cause them to forsake their faith in the Lord." Jubilees 49:8. This cosmic battle between good and evil adds a new depth to the story of Israel's enslavement. It shows that the oppression of Israel wasn't just a political struggle. Spiritual forces were at work behind the scenes, attempting to weaken Israel's faith and undermine God's plan for their deliverance. The involvement of angels and spiritual entities in this struggle highlights the larger, divine narrative that is unfolding. Israel's suffering becomes not just a physical ordeal, but a spiritual test of their faithfulness to God. In conclusion, Jubilees offers a deeper, more intricate view of Joseph's life and the events surrounding Israel's enslavement in Egypt. It reveals the prophetic nature of Joseph's role, connecting his life to the larger plan of redemption that would unfold through the Exodus. It also introduces a layer of spiritual warfare, showing that the oppression of Israel was not only a matter of political power, but a cosmic battle between good and evil. This richer narrative encourages us to see Israel's suffering not as a random historical event, but as a necessary part of God's divine plan, ultimately leading to their deliverance and the glory of His name. God's plan for the deliverance of Israel is far more intricate and profound than it may first appear. The plagues of Egypt were not simply acts of divine judgment. They were part of a larger cosmic battle, a battle in which the forces of evil, led by Masta, sought to prevent Israel's exodus from Egypt. In this grand narrative, the heavenly tablets play a central role, offering us insight into how the laws and the precise timing of the Exodus were not merely reactions to Israel's suffering, but were part of God's eternal plan. According to the Book of Jubilees, the Exodus was not a random event or a mere consequence of Israel's oppression. It was a carefully orchestrated moment in time, preordained by God from the very beginning of creation. The Book of Jubilees reveals that the timing of Israel's deliverance was intricately connected to the observance of sacred laws, and this alignment was no coincidence. Israel's departure from Egypt, their journey toward freedom, was meant to bring them into harmony with the divine order of the universe. The suffering of Israel in Egypt, their eventual release, and the precise moment of their deliverance were all foreordained. God's actions were not just reactive. They were part of a larger, perfectly synchronized cosmic plan. As outlined in Jubilees, the heavenly tablets, which serve as a divine record of God's laws, played an essential role in setting the stage for this momentous event. On the 14th day of the first month, at the appointed time, God planned to bring Israel out of Egypt. This was not a spontaneous decision, but rather the fulfillment of a divine promise made from the beginning of creation itself. This specific timing was set apart, chosen before the foundations of the world were laid. This unique detail, found in Jubilees 49:1, contrasts with the Book of Exodus, which focuses primarily on the events leading up to the plagues and the subsequent deliverance. While Exodus highlights the dramatic historical significance of the plagues, Jubilees introduces a profound spiritual layer, one that connects the timing of the Exodus to the cosmic calendar of the universe. The Exodus, as understood in Jubilees, becomes much more than just a historical event. It becomes a pivotal moment in the spiritual fabric of creation. The 10 plagues of Egypt, as described in Exodus 7-12, are traditionally seen as a powerful display of God's authority. In Jubilees, however, these plagues take on a deeper, cosmic significance. They are not only divine punishments against Pharaoh and Egypt for their oppression, but also symbolic acts representing the defeat of Egypt's false gods and the spiritual forces behind them. Each plague, as Jubilees emphasizes, was a direct strike against Egypt's gods and their supposed powers. The plagues were not just aimed at Pharaoh's earthly authority, but at the spiritual rulers of Egypt, who were keeping God's people enslaved. Each plague undermined the false gods of Egypt and demonstrated that only the God of Israel held true power over heaven and earth. The plagues served as a public and cosmic declaration that the gods of Egypt were powerless before the Almighty. This cosmic battle, depicted in Jubilees, highlights the broader spiritual struggle between the forces of light and darkness. The plagues were not merely a judgment on Pharaoh's disobedience, but a divine victory over the forces of evil that sought to enslave Israel. The Book of Jubilees also introduces the idea that Mema, along with his evil forces, worked behind the scenes, trying to prevent Pharaoh from releasing Israel. Yet, God's power was greater and overwhelmed these dark forces at every turn. In Exodus, we read that Moses received God's commandments directly from him on Mount Sinai, but Jubilees provides additional details. It clarifies that the laws Moses received were not created at that moment. They were already inscribed on the heavenly tablets, which had existed long before Moses' time. According to Jubilees, these heavenly tablets serve as a cosmic record of all God's laws, which were established at the very beginning of creation. They were not just random rules, but a divine guide for both angels and humans alike. Moses, in this context, is not the initiator of the law, but the recipient of laws that were preordained and written long before humanity existed. These laws were always meant to be revealed, and their timing was in perfect accordance with God's divine calendar. In Jubilees 6:17, it is stated that the law and the testimony were written on the heavenly tablets even before the foundation of the world. The Mosaic Law, as presented in Jubilees, is not simply a set of rules for Israel. It is part of a cosmic order that governs the entire universe. This perspective reveals that the laws given to Moses were not an afterthought or a temporary solution, but were always part of God's eternal design. The laws were created to guide Israel, and their timing for revelation was orchestrated by God's divine will. In contrast to the traditional Exodus narrative, which focuses on the dramatic revelation of the law at Sinai, Jubilees presents a broader view. The laws were already inscribed in the heavens, awaiting the appointed time to be revealed to Moses and the Israelites. This suggests that the law was not a new idea, but a cosmic reality, waiting for the right moment in history. One of the most fascinating aspects of Jubilees is its insistence that the Mosaic Law was observed long before Moses' time. The book suggests that the laws of God were followed by the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even before Moses received them on Sinai. This idea challenges traditional assumptions about the law's origin and highlights its eternal nature. The laws were always in effect, even before they were formally given to Israel. Thus, Jubilees presents a view of God's plan for Israel's deliverance that emphasizes the cosmic significance of the Exodus. It shows that God's actions, including the timing of the plagues and the giving of the law, were part of a larger, divinely orchestrated plan that was set in motion before the foundation of the world. The Exodus was not just about Israel's liberation from Egypt. It was a cosmic event with spiritual implications that resonate throughout the entire universe. The Book of Jubilees portrays Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as righteous figures, but it doesn't specifically state that they were given the full set of laws that would later be delivered to Moses. Instead, Jubilees suggests that the patriarchs were already observing the Sabbath, performing sacrifices, and following many of the laws that would later be revealed to Moses. This view implies that the Mosaic Law is not a new development, but rather a restoration of laws that had been passed down from the beginning of time. According to this perspective, the patriarchs received these divine commandments through revelation, either directly from God or through the angels who guided them. For instance, Abraham is depicted as following the Sabbath and adhering to dietary laws long before they were officially given to Israel. Abraham not only kept the Sabbath, but he also circumcised his sons and faithfully followed the commandments of the Lord. These commandments, according to the Book of Jubilees, were written on heavenly tablets and were revealed to Abraham through the angels. In Jubilees 16:28, it is mentioned that Abraham's obedience to these commandments predates the formal delivery of the law to Israel. Through this lens, Jubilees presents the law as a timeless moral code that has been in place since the days of Adam, with Moses simply being the individual chosen to deliver it in its complete form to the nation of Israel. One of the most distinctive aspects of the Book of Jubilees is its emphasis on the cosmic calendar. In this text, the observance of time, especially the Sabbath, the festivals, and the Jubilee years, is seen as central to the divine order. These laws of timekeeping are presented as a crucial part of the heavenly tablets, and adhering to them is viewed as a way to align oneself with the divine rhythm of the universe. In Jubilees, time is not merely a sequence of days and years. It is a sacred structure that allows humans to participate in the divine plan. The observance of this cosmic calendar, particularly the Sabbath, is emphasized as the right way to live according to God's will. Jubilees specifically highlights the solar calendar over the lunar calendar, with each year consisting of 364 days. This solar system is presented as the correct way to observe God's commandments, ensuring that all festivals and Sabbaths occur on the appropriate days. The book warns that deviating from this divine calendar can lead to spiritual disorder. In Jubilees 52, it is written that God told Moses to write down for Israel the law of the Sabbath and the festivals, for these times are ordained on the heavenly tablets, and you must observe them exactly, lest you fall into error. This insistence on adhering to the correct calendar is one of the most striking features of Jubilees, as it stresses that human life must align with this heavenly schedule. While the traditional Bible mentions the Sabbath and the festivals, it does not place the same emphasis on their cosmic origins. The focus in the traditional scriptures is more on the covenant between God and Israel, with less attention given to the idea of a universal divine calendar. Jubilees, however, stresses that following this cosmic calendar is essential for staying in God's favor, as it brings human life into harmony with the divine plan. In this text, the laws that were given to Moses are not seen as exclusive to Israel, but as eternal and binding for all generations, including the angels. The Book of Jubilees makes it clear that the laws inscribed on the heavenly tablets are not mere temporary guidelines for a single nation, but eternal commandments governing both heaven and earth. According to Jubilees, the angels themselves are seen as keeping the Sabbath and observing God's festivals in heaven. This elevates the Mosaic Law from being merely a set of human guidelines to something that affects both the spiritual and physical realms. The law that was revealed to Moses on Mount Sinai is depicted as eternal, to be observed both on earth and in heaven. As stated in Jubilees 50:13, the angels keep the Sabbath, and the righteous will observe these commandments forever. This concept of the eternal nature of God's law is not as explicitly emphasized in the traditional Bible, where the primary focus is on the covenant between God and Israel. In Jubilees, however, the law is described as an intrinsic part of the fabric of the universe. It is a divine order that binds both angels and humans, connecting the spiritual realm with the physical realm. This view of the law as eternal and universal presents a broader vision than the one typically found in the traditional scriptures. Furthermore, the Book of Jubilees presents the future of Israel as part of a divinely orchestrated timeline, which has been written on the heavenly tablets since the beginning of time. This timeline outlines not only the rise and fall of nations, but also the exile and eventual return of Israel, culminating in the final judgment that will come upon the world. Everything in human history, from creation to the final judgment, is seen as following this cosmic schedule, which is recorded in heaven. This view of history underscores the idea that the events of the world are not random, but rather part of a divine plan that has been set in motion from the very beginning. In summary, the Book of Jubilees offers a unique perspective on the Mosaic Law, presenting it not as a new development, but as a restoration of eternal commandments that were given to the patriarchs long before Moses. It highlights the importance of observing the cosmic calendar, which aligns human life with God's divine order. In this view, the law is not just for Israel, but for all of creation, including the angels. The laws of timekeeping and the commandments given to Moses are depicted as eternal, governing both the spiritual and physical realms, and binding humanity to the divine will. The future of Israel, as described in Jubilees, is part of a divinely ordained timeline, showing that all of history is unfolding according to God's cosmic plan. Jubilees and the divine plan of Israel's destiny. The Book of Jubilees stands out for its strong emphasis on the belief that all events in history are preordained by God, unfolding according to His divine plan. Nothing occurs outside of His will. According to Jubilees, the journey of Israel, including their exile, suffering, and eventual restoration, was all written in the heavenly records long before it happened. These events must unfold according to a divinely appointed timeline. Every aspect of Israel's history, from their rebellion to their ultimate redemption, was inscribed on the heavenly tablets. The times for their deliverance were determined long ago. Every part of their story, including their trials and triumphs, is part of a grand cosmic design. In contrast to the more focused accounts in Genesis and Exodus, the Book of Jubilees offers a much broader view. It reveals that Israel's destiny is not just about the nation itself, but is intricately woven into a larger, predetermined cosmic plan that has already been set in motion. This perspective sets Jubilees apart, offering a sweeping, prophetic overview of the people of Israel's history and future. A key theme throughout Jubilees is the crucial role played by angels in Israel's story. While angels are mentioned in other biblical texts, their role in Jubilees is particularly emphasized. These heavenly beings are portrayed as essential agents of God's judgment. In the book, angels are depicted as having a significant role in carrying out God's will on both earth and in heaven. This heavenly involvement becomes even more pronounced as the end times approach. According to Jubilees, as the days draw to a close, the angels of the Lord will descend to execute divine judgment on the nations. Their task will be to separate the righteous from the wicked, gathering those who have remained faithful to God's commandments. This judgment is not just an event of cosmic significance. It is also a practical divine intervention that ensures God's will is carried out, both in heaven and on earth. One particularly dramatic and important event in Jubilees concerns the binding of Metima, the leader of the evil spirits. According to the book, Metima will be cast into the abyss, symbolizing the ultimate defeat of the forces of darkness. This marks the beginning of the end for the powers of evil. The angels, as agents of divine justice, will bind the prince of evil and cast him into the abyss, where he will remain until the time of judgment, when he will be destroyed forever. This act signifies a turning point in the cosmic struggle between good and evil. Jubilees' portrayal of angels is unique in its focus on their role in the end times. While the traditional Bible also speaks of angels in the context of judgment, as seen in the Book of Revelation, Jubilees goes a step further, offering a more detailed vision of their role in the spiritual warfare that will unfold during the final days. Angels are not merely messengers, but active participants in the battle against evil, executing God's will in the process. One of the central themes in Jubilees is the prophetic vision of Israel's redemption. Despite Israel's history of rebellion and exile, God has already predetermined a time when the nation will be restored to their land and their covenant with God will be renewed. This restoration, as described in Jubilees, is more than just a political event. It is a spiritual renewal that aligns with the cosmic plan written in the heavenly tablets. The book makes it clear that Israel's redemption will come after a period of intense suffering, a period of great tribulation, during which the nation will undergo a purification process. During this time, the law will be re-established, and the people will once again walk in holiness, preparing for the coming of the Messiah and the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. The time will come, as Jubilees prophesies, when the children of Israel will turn back to the Lord with all their hearts. At that moment, God will gather them from the nations and establish them once more in their land, as it was written in the heavenly tablets. This will mark the fulfillment of God's promises to his people. The traditional Bible also speaks of Israel's restoration, for instance, in the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah. But Jubilees adds the important detail that this restoration is not just a matter of national politics. It is a part of a divinely determined timeline, with specific events that are already recorded in the heavenly records. As the end times unfold, Jubilees describes the coming of a messianic kingdom, where God's chosen ruler, often interpreted as the Messiah, will establish righteousness on earth. The book emphasizes that this kingdom will mark the end of the current age and the beginning of God's eternal reign. Under his rule, the law will be upheld, and the righteous will inherit the earth. In this messianic kingdom, the final judgment will take place. The righteous will be separated from the wicked, with the wicked being cast into the lake of fire, where they will be destroyed forever. In Jubilees, this is the ultimate defeat of evil, the defeat of Mentema and his evil spirits, and the establishment of a new order under the reign of the Messiah. This vision aligns with the apocalyptic imagery found in the Book of Revelation. But Jubilees goes a step further in emphasizing the role of the law and the cosmic order being restored. Jubilees' vision of the Messianic kingdom is one of a fully restored creation, where God's law is fully observed, and the righteous are rewarded for their faithfulness. The final judgment will lead to the ultimate defeat of evil, ushering in an era of eternal peace. In this new world, the righteous will rule alongside God, and his law will be written on their hearts. The wicked will be cast into the lake of fire, and they will be no more. This vision of the end times in Jubilees offers a unique and profound understanding of God's eternal plan for Israel and the world. It provides us with a cosmic perspective on biblical history, one that connects the past, present, and future in a grand, divine narrative. If you found value in this deep dive into the Book of Jubilees and its unique cosmic vision of biblical history, please share this video with others who might be interested in exploring these profound mysteries. By sharing, you help us continue uncovering ancient texts and revealing the hidden layers of God's eternal plan. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Deep Bible Stories and join the conversation in the comments below. Together, we can delve even deeper into these fascinating biblical insights.